I never imagined silence could be so loud. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears. That makes your chest feel hollow, like something essential has been removed and forgotten on the floor. The house wasn't empty, but it felt abandoned. Toys lay scattered in the living room, frozen mid-play. A small shoe sat near the door, turned on its side, as if waiting for a foot that would never return. My child's shoe. I stood there longer than I should have. Keys still in my hand, work bag hanging from my shoulder, staring at something so small that now carried unbearable weight. She was gone. Not just my wife, my child, too. There had been no screaming match, no dramatic fight, no warning that today would be the day my life split in half. Just a note on the dining table, written in handwriting I knew better than my own. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I need a better life for our child. That was it. No goodbye. No explanation. No chance to hold my child one last time. I dropped my bag slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little control I had left. My eyes scanned the room again, desperately searching for anything that suggested this wasn't real. Her favorite mug was gone. Her coat was missing. The framed photo of us from years ago was no longer on the wall. She hadn't just left, she had planned it. I sat down on the couch, the same one where my child used to fall asleep on my chest while cartoons played quietly in the background. My arms felt heavier without that small weight. My body remembered something my mind refused to accept. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. That was when fear replaced shock. Not fear of losing I already had. Fear of losing my child forever. Years earlier, we weren't always broken. Once, we were simple. We met when life still felt full of possibilities. She had laughed easily back then. The kind of laugh that made strangers turn their heads. I was ambitious, hopeful, convinced that effort always paid off, eventually. We built our life slowly, modestly. I worked long hours, chasing stability. She stayed home more often after our child was born, saying she wanted to be present, that money could wait. I believed her. I trusted her. I didn't see the resentment forming. In the quiet moments, the way she watched other women post luxury trips online, the way she sighed when bills arrived, the subtle distance that crept in when I came home tired instead of excited. I thought love was enough. I was wrong. The first crack. It started with small comments. You're always working. Other men provide better lives. Our child deserves more. At first, I agreed with her. That promotions take time. That sacrifice was temporary. But time doesn't wait for promises. She grew colder. More distant. Our conversations became negotiations instead of warmth. She stopped sharing her thoughts with me, stopped asking about my day, and I foolishly worked harder, believing success would fix everything. I didn't realize she had already begun imagining a life without me. The day she left, that morning had felt normal. I kissed my child's forehead before leaving for work. She smiled, reached for me. I told her I'd be back soon. I never imagined that would be the last time I'd see her in that house. By evening, everything I loved was gone. I reported it immediately. Lawyers, calls, paperwork, endless. Explanations to people who didn't understand how a mother could just take a child and disappear legally into gray areas. She had prepared. She had family support. Money I didn't know about. A plan that didn't include me. And suddenly, I was alone, fighting a system that moved slowly, while my child grew farther away every day. The truth I didn't know yet. At the time, I believed her words. That she left for a better life. That she was protecting our child. That I wasn't enough. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until years later, was the truth. She had buried the truth about money, about lies, about why she ran instead of fought. And when that truth finally surfaced, she would come back. Not confident, not proud, but begging, because by then, everything had changed, including me. The first night alone didn't end when the sun rose. Morning came quietly, almost respectfully, as if it knew it didn't belong. Light slipped through the curtains and landed on the empty space beside me. I stared at it longer than I should have, waiting for something movement, sound. A child's voice calling my name. Nothing came. I sat up slowly. The house felt unfamiliar now, like a place I had broken into by mistake. Every room carried echoes of a life that no longer existed. A half-drawn crayon on paper. A cup left where it used to be, silence thick enough to feel physical. I checked my phone again. No messages. No calls. No explanations. That was when reality stopped being shocking and started being heavy. The days that followed, people assume pain arrives loudly, that it announces itself with breakdowns and screams. But real pain is quieter. It arrives disguised as routine. I still woke up early, still showered, still went to work, but I wasn't present. At my desk, emails blurred into noise. Conversations happened around me, not with me. My body moved through the day, on habit alone, while my mind stayed trapped in the moment. I opened that door and found nothing waiting. At night, the loneliness hit harder. I found myself listening for footsteps that never came, checking the time, wondering where my child was sleeping. Whether they missed me, whether they had asked for me. That question hurt the most. Fighting the wrong enemy. At first, I blamed myself. If I had earned more, if I had come home earlier, if I had noticed sooner. Guilt is seductive, like that tit gives pain a target. It convinces you that suffering is punishment you deserve. But slowly, painfully, I began to realize something. I hadn't been abandoned because I failed as a father. I had been left because she chose escape over effort. That understanding didn't erase the pain, but it changed its shape. The system doesn't care about fathers. Legal meetings became my new routine. Forms, dates, cold rooms with colder faces. I explained my side again and again to people who treated it like a transaction. Custody laws, jurisdictions, waiting periods. Everything moved slowly too. Slowly, for a parent who measured time in missed bedtimes and forgotten birthdays. She took the child with consent, they said. She hasn't broken the law, they said. You'll have to be patient, they said. Patience felt like a punishment. But anger wouldn't bring my child back. Desperation wouldn't either. So I did the only thing left. I endured. A different kind of strength. Something strange happened in that endurance. I stopped begging the universe for answers and started asking myself harder questions. Who am I without them? What kind of man survives this? What kind of father waits without disappearing? I cleaned the house not to erase them, but to reclaim myself. I boxed memories carefully instead of destroying them. I kept the room exactly as it was. That room wasn't empty, it was waiting. The first step forward. One evening, after weeks of isolation, I went for a walk. No destination, no goal. Just movement. The city didn't care about my loss. People laughed. Cars passed. Life continued with an indifference that felt cruel, but also honest. That was when I understood something crucial. My life hadn't ended. It had narrowed. and narrow paths require focus. I wouldn't chase her. I wouldn't collapse. I wouldn't disappear. If my child ever looked for me again, I wanted them to find a man who stood his ground, even when everything was taken from him. That night, for the first time since they left, I slept without waking up in panic. Not because it hurt less, but because I had chosen to stay. Time didn't heal me. It reshaped me. The first year after they left passed like a fog I walked through without direction. Days blended into nights, and nights into mornings. I stopped marking time by dates and started measuring it by absences I missed, first words I didn't hear, steps I wasn't there to catch. I sent messages, polite ones, careful ones, messages that never accused, never begged. Most went unanswered. When replies came, they were short, distant, legal. Always about schedules, never about feelings. Always about control, never about cooperation. That was when I understood something painful but important. I was no longer her partner. I was an inconvenience. Disappearing quietly, I learned to stop chasing explanations. Not because I didn't want them, but because every unanswered message took something from me: dignity, strength, focus. So, I did what desperate people rarely do. I stepped back. I stopped posting online. Stopped explaining myself to friends who didn't know what to say. I reduced my life to essentials: work, sleep, discipline. People mistook my silence for weakness. They were wrong. Work became my refuge. At first, work was just distraction. Then it became structure. Then slowly it became purpose. I stayed late. Learned new skills. Took on projects others avoided. I stopped asking for validation and started producing results that spoke without emotion. While others talked about success, I built something quiet and solid beneath the surface. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was trying to survive. The lies began to crack. Years passed. My child grew. I watched from a distance through secondhand photos. Rare updates. Glimpses that hurt more than they helped. And then, one evening, something changed. A message came from someone unexpected. Not from her. From someone who knew her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't detailed. Just a sentence. You don't know the whole story. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything she ever said. Truth arrives slowly. Over time, fragments surfaced. Money that wasn't hers. Support that wasn't permanent. Promises that came with conditions. The life she ran to wasn't as stable as she had believed. And the reason she left hadn't been only ambition. It had been fear. Fear that I would eventually see the truth, and fear that I would grow into someone she could no longer control. Becoming unrecognizable. By the 5th year, I barely recognized myself. Not because I was broken. Because I was sharper, calmer. I spoke less. Observed more. I learned patience, not as virtue, but as strategy. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I fantasized about peace. And peace, I realized, comes from standing tall enough that the past can't reach your throat anymore. The man who waits. I never stopped being a father. Even from afar. I kept records, memories, letters never sent but carefully written. A life preserved not in bitterness, but in readiness. Because one day, the truth would surface fully. And when it did, I wanted my child to find a man who hadn't collapsed when abandoned, but one who became unshakable. Truth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, almost politely, like it's afraid of what it might destroy if it comes too fast. The message from before stayed in my mind longer than it should have. You don't know the whole story. I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I had learned something over the years. When people want to tell the truth, they eventually do. And when they want to manipulate you, they rush. So, I waited. A name from the past. Weeks passed before another message came. This time, it had a name attached to it. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who used to be close to her. Close enough to know what happened after she left. The message was short. Can we talk? You deserve to know. Deserve. That word landed harder than anything else. I agreed to meet not because I wanted closure, but because I needed clarity. For myself, for my child, the conversation that changed everything. We met in a quiet cafe. Neutral ground. No memories attached. They looked uncomfortable, nervous. Kind of person who had carried guilt longer than they wanted to admit. They didn't start with excuses. They started with silence. Then they spoke. She hadn't left because she was brave. She hadn't left because she was certain. She left because someone promised her a life that didn't include struggle and made her believe that taking the child was temporary. That promise didn't last. The illusion of stability. The man she left with, the one she believed would secure her future, wasn't the savior she imagined. Support came with conditions. Affection came with control. And love came last if at all. The life she chose wasn't built on strength. It was built on fear of falling behind. And when reality replaced fantasy, she didn't know how to turn back. Why I was cut off. The hardest truth wasn't about her. It was about me. She didn't keep my child away because I was unfit. She did it because I was inconvenient. I represented stability without illusion. Responsibility without shortcuts. A life that required patience. And patience was the one thing she didn't have anymore. What hurt the most? I asked one question. Does my child know I never stopped caring? The answer wasn't immediate. They were told, you chose work over them. That sentence didn't break me. It froze me. Because lies told to adults can be undone. But lies told to children grow roots. Anger, finally, but controlled. For the first time in years, I felt anger. Not the reckless kind. The focused kind. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that remembers. I didn't lash out. I didn't confront her. I did something better. I documented everything. Dates, messages, patterns, contradictions. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs evidence. A shift inside me. That night, I sat alone, not in grief, but in awareness. I realized something crucial. I hadn't been waiting for her to return. I had been preparing for the moment the truth would matter. And that moment was coming. Not soon. But, inevitably. Because lies collapse under their own weight, and when they do, the people who told them always look for somewhere safe to land. This time, I would be standing on solid ground. The day the truth fully reached me, it wasn't loud. There was no screaming. No confrontation. Just a single call. I heard her voice. It was hesitant, trembling. A voice that used to command confidence now sounded fragile. Years had softened her tone, but the weight of her mistakes pressed through every syllable. I need to explain. Can we meet? I didn't rush to respond. I didn't panic. I had spent years watching from the sidelines, letting the world spin around me while I built my foundation. Now, it was her turn to feel the imbalance. I agreed, seeing the consequences. The meeting was quiet, almost unbearably still. She came expecting, pleading, tears, maybe excuses. Instead, she found a man who had not broken, not a man bent over by grief, not a man lost in despair, but a man who had grown sharper, calmer, and more unshakable than she could have imagined. I let her speak first. She rambled words, stumbling over truths, lies, half-confessions, and excuses. I listened, every lie, every misdirection. Every attempt to justify leaving was catalogued in my mind. Not angrily, but meticulously. Because this time, I was not a man without knowledge. This time, I knew everything. The shift in power. I realized something profound as she spoke. The world she had created around herself, her career, her relationships. Her child was not as solid as she believed. The very decisions she had made, the promises she had broken, the control she had tried to assert, they all had consequences. And those consequences were finally reaching her. Her eyes darted nervously, seeking weakness. She did not find it. Instead, she found composure, strength, control. The realization hit her like a cold gust of wind. The man she abandoned was no longer someone she could intimidate or manipulate. He had become untouchable not because of money, not because of revenge, but because of purpose and patience. Facing the child she took. When the topic of our child came up, her voice cracked. She tried to justify her absence, to frame the decisions she made as for their best interest, but I didn't need justification. I had watched, learned, and prepared. I knew the child deserved truth, stability, and a life anchored in honesty, not in manipulative narratives. She realized then that she had handed me the upper hand not because I sought it, but because she had chosen her path without considering the consequences, the calm before the storm.
By the end of the conversation, she left not fully reconciled, not fully defeated but shaken. Her eyes betrayed fear, uncertainty, and the bitter taste of reality she had never anticipated. I remained, alone, quiet, composed. I had spent years not for revenge, not for pride, but for the moment the truth could empower me. And now that moment had arrived. I looked out the window at the city lights and felt a weight lift. The game had changed. The pieces were aligned. And this time I would move with precision. Because patience, when combined with awareness, becomes power. And power is not given. It is earned. The hardest truths aren't the ones adults argue about. They're the ones children have to carry. I didn't rush this moment. I prepared for it the way I prepared for everything else. Quietly, patiently, with evidence instead of emotion. Because when the truth finally met my child, it had to arrive clean. No anger, no blame, just clarity. We met in a small, neutral place, a park near the river. Open sky, no walls. I wanted them to feel safe, not cornered. I sat across from them and waited until they spoke first. They asked a simple question. Why weren't you there? I didn't defend myself. I didn't accuse their mother. I told the truth the way it should be told to a child. Carefully, gently, without poison. I tried. I never stopped trying. I showed them letters I had written but never sent. Photos I kept, messages that went unanswered. Records of birthdays remembered from afar. Not to prove a point, but to show consistency. The silence that followed was long. Then something shifted. The cracks in the story they were told. Children don't need dramatic revelations. They sense patterns. They sense sincerity. And they sense lies long before adults think they do. My child didn't cry. They didn't explode with emotion. They just looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. And I knew. They were comparing two realities. One built on control and explanation. The other built on patience and proof. Her panic. When she realized what was happening, it was too late. Her calls came faster. Messages longer. The tone changed. From confidence to urgency, from authority to fear. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of the truth becoming independent of her. Because once a child begins asking their own questions, control slips fast. The legal line I never crossed. I didn't attack. I didn't ambush. I moved cleanly. I involved professionals, mediators, records, neutral voices. Every step documented. Every word calm. Not to destroy her, but to protect my child. That distinction mattered, because one day my child would read everything. And I wanted them to see restraint, not revenge. The moment she begged. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She begged for things to stay the same. That was the moment I understood everything. She wasn't asking to heal. She was asking not to lose control. And control once exposed cannot be negotiated back. I told her one sentence. The truth isn't something I'm taking from you. It's something you hid. She went silent, choosing the ending. That night I sat alone again, but this time the silence felt different. Lighter. I wasn't fighting to be seen anymore. I was simply standing where I always belonged. The final chapter wasn't going to be about humiliation or revenge. It was going to be about return. Not hers, mine. Because when the truth finally stands on its own, no one needs to beg anymore.
She didn't return the way people imagine regret. There were no dramatic entrances, no public scenes, no collapsing to the ground in tears. She returned quietly, like someone who had already lost and finally understood why. The moment she knew. She learned the truth in pieces, from questions she couldn't answer, from a child who stopped accepting rehearsed explanations, from documents she didn't think mattered anymore, and finally from silence, the kind of silence that follows when control is gone. By the time she came to me, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for permission. The begging wasn't loud. She stood across from me, hands folded tightly, eyes tired, not dramatic, not angry, just defeated. I didn't know it would end like this, she said. That sentence told me everything. She didn't regret the choice. She regretted the outcome. What I didn't say. I didn't remind her of the nights I waited. I didn't list the birthdays I missed. I didn't explain how long it took to rebuild myself from silence, because I didn't need to. She could see it. In my posture, in my calm, in the way I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The child made the decision. The most important choice wasn't mine. It never was. Children don't choose based on speeches. They choose based on consistency. And when my child spoke, clearly, calmly, it ended everything. I want both of you, they said. But I want the truth. There was no argument left after that. What power really looks like. Power isn't humiliating someone who already knows they've fallen. Power is standing steady when someone expects you to strike. I didn't take revenge. I took responsibility. For my child. For myself. For the future I was quietly building while everyone else underestimated silence. The final exchange. Before she left, she asked one last question. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, I said. I outgrew you. That was when she cried. Not because she lost me, but because she realized she never understood what she had. Where I stand now, I didn't win by taking everything back. I won by becoming someone who no longer needed to. I didn't return to reclaim the past. I returned as a man who owned his present. And when she walked away that final time, she wasn't leaving with my child. She was leaving with the truth. Some people leave chasing illusions. Others stay, build quietly, and become the truth they can't escape.